Hi guys, I'm back again, part two. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this slide because it's a very important concept in animal agriculture. And that concept is nature versus nurture. So don't get these two mixed up. Nature is not the nature that the animal is born into. Nature is the genotype that the animal receives. So it's the genes the animal inherits. And some traits we can select for better than others. So heritability is a measure of how easy it is to select, how easily you can make genetic progress. So some traits are passed on, relatively easily. Other traits, it's hard to select for. But nature is basically the genotype the animal receives when it's born. For example, I gave you that example of the kid that goes out and spends $1,000 on a market lamb for a county fair. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. The genotype of that animal is very good. He has all the traits needed to make a good market lamb. He's muscular, he's tight-hided, he's got it driven up in his front end. He's a really nice lamb. But if he isn't raised right, then that's going to have an impact on his phenotype, what he's going to look like. The other thing I wanted to tell you, that I want to remind you, because we've already seen it in another video, was that certain traits are more heritable than others. The example was given in that PowerPoint, or the video, that the hog producer video. It was very brief, and he mentioned that about 35% of an animal's behavior or demeanor is heritable. So what that means is there is a genetic component to an animal's behavior. So I'll just give you an example of my life, in my situation. I raise sheep, and every now and then you get a crazy one that always wants to run the opposite way of everyone else, one that wants to jump out of the pen. That's 35% heritable. Got to remember that, because when she has babies, guess what? Her babies are going to be predisposed to being a little crazy, because genotype and this particular trait is heritable. On the other hand, if we take that same sheep and we realize that if it's 35% heritable, then about 65% of that animal's behavior is shaped by the environment. So what's more important? Well, part of it is the environment, but there is a heritability component. So environmental effects are things like, nutrition, experiences the animal receives, training, disease, we already talked about that. And the behavioral thing I said was about 65% of animals' behavior is shaped by the environment. I wanted to bring up just a little thing on dogs, nature versus nurture. So I'll just tell you real quick. I wish I was lecturing, then I'd get lost in some tangent. But anyway, I have a border collie, a red border collie, and he is mean. He's very mean. He's bitten several people, and I've threatened to put him down numerous times. But he's old, geriatric now, and he loves me. I can't put an animal down that loves me. He adores me, but he just hates everyone else. And you can tell a dog has troubles. The thing about the dog is I got him through a rescue. And I would put that in your mind as far as, rehabilitating rescued animals. You don't know what their factors were in their environment. I know that red border collies have a tendency to have a little bit of a off personality, just a little bit. But I can tell you right now that dog was not raised right. He was not raised to, be friendly to people. And he might not have been like that had he been raised differently. But there's lots of dog examples, and that's going to be one of your homework assignments this week, that concept of nature versus nurture. So anyway, my red border collie, his name's Red, by the way, he's a good example of nature versus nurture. Okay, so we talked about selection. Selection is where we try to select the heritable traits and make a difference in our livestock for the better. So remember, different traits have different levels of heritability. So the effective keys to making genetic progress, good selection, the traits, the things that we're looking for is the trait that we're breeding for has to be heritable. Some traits are just a really environmental. The biggest impact is the environment. Like, a good quality in sheep would be livability. When a lamb hits the ground, is it going to live? That's not a heritable trait, because if the animal doesn't live, it doesn't get to pass on very much DNA. So that's a very low heritability trait. Livability in baby lambs is an environmental trait. Are you taking care of them? Does you take care of them? Things like that. So so the trait has to be heritable if you want to make progress in selecting for it. And then you have to measure it accurately. A lot of times, traits that we're going to select for have a great degree of variation, and we want to make sure what we're selecting for, we know what that is. And we have our pedigrees, and we know what those traits are. But that's kind of at a higher level than just the Animal Science 200 class. So in order for our selection to be effective, you have to eliminate as many environmental factors as possible, because that throws in differentials in the phenotype. We have to look at the big picture of where the animal is going to be, living, if it's going to be a range bull or something like that. And I think the other thing you have to think about is we have to look at who your customers are when you start selecting for certain traits, because you can have the best, weaning weight in your calves, but maybe after that they grow slowly. So we have to look at where those calves are headed, like to a feedlot, or are they going to become breeding animals themselves? So heritability is a math problem. Heritability is the percent of phenotypic variation due to a genetic effect. So of what you see in that animal, how much is due to genetics and how much is due to the environment? Genes, nature, environment, nurture. So if the yearling weight is 40% heritable, that's pretty high heritability. That means 40% of what you're seeing when you go to look at yearling heifers, they're a year old. 40% of what you're seeing in terms of their phenotype is heritable in terms of their weight. So that is a good example of heritability. So what it shows you is that's 40%. So they give you a high-end animal and a lower-end animal. And maybe this is, what your bull was, and this is what your cow. The difference is 200 pounds. Multiply that times the heritability, which is 40%. And basically, that means that if we use this bull on this cow, we should get about an 80% increase in weaning weights or yearling weights in cattle with 40% heritability. So that's an important trait. We're not going to spend too much time on that, but genetics is a lot of statistics and a lot of math. So if you like it, that's good. So it says selection differential, superiority or inferiority of a selected stock compared to the herd average. So if you have a wool sheep and the average fleece weight of the rams in the flock is 6 pounds, and the average of your rams that you want to breed to is 9 pounds, then the selection differential is 3 pounds. It's a difference. So we would think, depending on if wool fleece weight is highly heritable, we're going to make some progress in those rams that have their offspring have weights of 6 pounds. So remember that selection differential is a difference where we are and what we're breeding to, what their whatever fleece weight is. Okay, so here's an interesting thing that is important, and I think it's funny because the guy who wrote this book, he does talk a lot about cattle, but they talk about the generation interval, and so the generation interval is the average age of the parents when the progeny are born. So average age of the parents when offspring are born. So in bulls, the average age when offspring are born is 4 years of age, and cows is 7 years of age. So I don't know where they get the 7 years of age in cows, because I don't quite get that. But if you take that, and that's in your herd, let's just take that's your herd, then your generation interval is 5.5 years. So from the time that is the generation interval. Okay, so we're going to use that here in the next problem. So if we want to predict genetic change, we're going to take our change per year. So if our average weaning weight is 600 pounds, our average weaning weight of the herd is 400 pounds, we know it's heritable at 30%, and our generation interval is 6 years. I know it sounds complicated. You can look at the slides again. We're going to subtract our selected differential. We're going to get 200 pounds. We're going to multiply that 200 pounds times that 30% heritability, and then we're going to divide that by 6, or actually it should be 5.5 because that's your generation interval. And that's going to tell you that you should increase, with that particular combination of bull and cow, you're going to increase your weaning weight at 10 pounds per year. And remember, cattle are sold by the pound. So 10 pounds per year could be, $15 to $20 per head, depending on what cattle prices are, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're selling 1,000 head of cattle, it makes a lot. So this is a really interesting slide. And basically what this slide does is it tells you how heritable traits are. And so it's important because basically it shows traits that are worth selecting for and traits that are not. So a good example here is calving interval. Calving interval has very low heritability. Calving interval is a time from when a cow has a calf until she gets bred and has another calf. So cows are pregnant for 9 months, and then they're with their baby for about 6 months. During that time, she usually gets rebred. She has her calf, and she usually gets rebred within about 45 days after calving. But that is not very heritable. Why isn't it heritable? Because it means 90% of the calving interval trait is environmental, which is so true. It depends on if there's a bull around, if we're going to synchronize our cows, there's huge amount of environmental factors. So when we look at heritable traits, those are traits we can make quick genetic progress in. When you have traits that are low heritability, like I said, livability in baby lambs is very low because it's not a genetic trait, it's an environmental trait. So that is important to look at. I thought this is interesting because, he's a Texan and he's got quarter horses and other horses. I just thought this was kind of interesting. So you guys have all heard of cutting horses. So the heritability on cutting horses is 5%. What does that tell you? That tells you that 95% of a cutting horse's ability to cut cattle, if you watch a cutting competition like in Yellowstone, did you watch that? 95% of that is training. It's the environment. So that's interesting because people can talk all day long about what a good cutting horse it is, but it's really the trainer that should get the credit at the end of the day. Here's some more traits. So sheep, let's see if they have livability. No, they don't. So look at this. Twinning in sheep. Twins are a blessing and a curse in sheep. Anybody who raises sheep knows that. So multiple births is a relatively low heritability. And the reason why is because, 80% of multiple births is due to environmental factors. You say, what environmental factors? I thought it had to do with, selecting for twins. No, it doesn't. It has to do with the nutrition of the female, same with in hogs, litter size, 10% heritable. Has to do with nutrition at the time of conception. It has to do with how the animal is taken care of during gestation. But there is a slight genetic component to that. So heritability is a trait is important to look at, but we can only, you can talk to people all day long. Oh yeah, that ewe was a twin, was a triplet. Okay, well really in the big world, it doesn't matter because the amount of twins and triplets you get is due to something else besides genetics. And there's only one something else, and the something else is environment. So this makes you a smart animal scientist right here. This is just a quick picture of how milk production is increased. I know we've already studied this, and my data, of course, is a little bit older. But look at this; it's amazing. The reason why cows produce more milk today is because of genetic selection. Look, if you talk about, don't get me started. If we talk about, all the bad things that cows are attributed to doing, like destroying the ozone layer, which is a bunch of bunk if you ask me. In 1940, there were more than twice as many cows around, and they produced almost half as much total milk. Today, we have 9.2 million cows in the United States. The average cow produces 22,000 pounds of milk. If you talk about carbon footprint, if you talk about methane production, if you talk about all the bad things that people want to talk about cows, you never give any credit to the fact that the genetic selection in dairy cows has allowed us to have fewer, higher producing animals. So as far as that goes, that's something that has to do very much so with genetic selection. It has to do with environment also, but you can go back and look at the chart where milk production is. It's a heritable trait. Okay, and last but not least, the last slide, and I have 30 seconds to talk about it. These are just some 6 traits in a